Okay, welcome back. We are playing some more Magic 2013. Actually, we are taking a look at the Berserker Rage deck, the Gruul deck, the insane Timmy deck, which basically means a deck filled with huge creatures that are just made for smashing in there. But it's a little different from Pack Instinct, which is mostly about smashing in there, just with these huge guys, which are difficult to deal with unless you have direct removal. But then the deck has a lot of other huge creatures, so like just a lot of huge creatures. So once you remove one, in comes another, and it quickly drains your removal. Anyways, this deck is a little different because it has a lot of weird tricks and a lot of trample, lots of synergies and so on. So it's a little bit different from, for example, Pack Instinct. But let's take a look at it. I would also dare to say that it's a little bit faster than Pack Instinct because it can do a hell of a lot of damage in a very, very short time. And I've seen it referred to on the Wizards community forums as the one-turn kill deck. Not because you kill in the first turn, but because you can do without, like, there's other decks where you can swing in with a bunch of guys or just save up and eventually you'll be able to do like 200 points of damage or something. But this deck does that in turn 5. Not 200 points of damage, but it'll do enough damage to kill you unless you dismantle it quickly. So first of all, I haven't played this online yet, just to let you know. So everything I say is based on me unlocking the cards, putting it together, and just, you know, looking through the deck and seeing how does the thing look in theory. And after playing it online, I'll perhaps start getting some more empirical data, you could say, and I'll have more a more experienced evaluation to offer. But let's take a look at the deck. First of all, the Gruul are it's very fitting. It's called Berserker Rage, but it's not the only thing that the Gruul is about. The Gruul is about, they were originally about being caretakers of unspoiled nature, and not in the way that Celestia kind of cultivate nature. It's more of a hippie clan. It's more of nature from a sentient being's perspective, whereas the Golgari is more about hurrying up the life cycles and death cycles, life-death cycle, and so on. There are other guilds that mess around with the nature, or with nature, and two of them being the Simic, who messes around with nature by means of experimentation. So it's kind of like Darwinism on speed, or you could say what's it called? It's kind of like social Darwinism in a sense, if social encompasses the different creatures that you're messing around with. And the final one is the Isid, which does not deal as much with life and with nature in the traditional sense, but with the natural forces like water, ice, and fire, and lightning and stuff like that. With like natural forces, primal forces in that sense, and try to make crazy experiments. And the weirds are actually creatures that are made up of opposing natural forces, like, for example, steam and ice, for example, or fire and water, and so on. Anyways, the Gruul, getting back to the Gruul, they are, as I said before, they were all about. They were charged with the task of taking care of unspoiled nature, in a sense. But as the planet, I've explained this before. So if you heard this before in a different video of mine, you will. I hope you'll forgive me because this will take a minute or so. But and if I get something wrong, please correct me in the comment section. But as far as I know, they were charged with this. But as Ravnica, which is, I'll say this for the thousandth of time, for the thousandth time, as Ravnica is an ecumenopolis, which means a planet covered in city. As it soon expanded to become that, there were less and less spots of unspoiled nature, which led the Gruul to be kind of like an outcast or an anti-guild, because they had fewer and fewer areas of authority and less and less domains of governance, you could say. So basically, they became the anti-guild, anti-big city, anti-structures, and so on. You'll see this kind of sentiment echoed in some of the cards. For example, I think it's called Rumbling Slums or Roaring Slums. We'll get to it eventually. It has a very, very nice flavor text, and you'll see exactly you'll get a sense of what the Gruul is. But at the same time, because it's all about the untamed wilderness, you'll also have this kind of berserker, anti-authoritarian kind of a feel to this guild, and it is certainly portrayed in the way that the Gruul are huge, beastly mixtures of berserkers and warriors and creatures and barbarians and so on. And you'll see down here that the previous guild leader, they'll gain a new guild leader in the Return to Ravnica version, which we'll get in the Gate Crash set in February. We'll get new cards, which deals with the 5 guilds that we've, like the Demir, the Simic, the Orjov, what's the other one? The Boros and the Gruul. We'll get the newer cards there, not in Magic 2013, but or Duels of the Planeswalkers, but we'll get it in real life paper Magic, and they tend to shift out these older guild leaders because so much time has passed that either there's been rebellion or this individual has died, and another one or maybe a couple of other ones have succeeded after that. Anyways, this past guild leader, which was in effect during I believe it was either Dissension or Guild Pack, probably Dissension, was Borborygmus, and as it's been stated before, Borbor comes from the way that the Greek thought of is I think around the Baltic countries. There used to be like a language or Russian or Baltic around the time of the ancient Greeks that sounded to the Greek like ba 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 ba, and that's where the word barbarian came from. Borborygmus is also a play on a disease. I think it's called Borborygmi or something, but it's pretty interesting. Anyways, it's a legendary creature in the Cyclops, and that's the guild leader, 7 cost, and it's a beast. Let's take a look at the deck. I've been talking a mile a minute for a long time now. Okay. Right off the bat, you see another thing. If you saw my Orjob Grid Procession video, you'll see that I do choose to run Terramorphic Expanse, and that is because, and I've chosen to do it with the Izzet Mindstorms deck as well, because you cannot run these decks efficiently without a lot of lands, and Terramorphic Expanse is going to do that for you. It's not necessary in Golgari or in Sepulchral Strength, and there's a few other decks which run fairly smoothly without the Terramorphic Expanse or Evolving Wilds or whatever, but this deck needs its lands, and it needs it consistently, or else you're not going to drop those huge guys early on. And the Orjov deck is a deck that or the Grim Procession Orjov deck is going to hit land drop 5 or 7 before it stabilizes and gains the board position that it needs to be really, really forceful. And I wouldn't say that you need to get to land drop 7 with this deck, but you certainly need to get to land drop 5. And it's very important that you establish a strong position early on. So Terramorphic Expanse is going to help you with that. I hate to say it, but that's the I'm not religious, but the god-awful truth. Anyways, you'll see in this build, and as I've said before, this is not a sexy 60. This is not a deck tech video. It's not a compilation, or it's not a it is not how I recommend you to run it. I'll just showcase how I run it, and then in the upcoming videos I'll show you the results that I get when I'm playing online. Anyways, I have fewer creatures that you might imagine that I would run, but that is because of the Terramorphic Expanses and some of the many combat tricks. And I might change that up a lot because I'm having varied success with that. So far, I would say that it's been pretty good. I've only tested the deck against the AI because I wanted to unlock all the cards, and I almost just went through all of my opponents with ease because it's just such a strong deck. Anyways, what was I going to say? It's a somewhat decent curve. You'll see that you have in my build you'll have a couple of 6+ cards. I think 1 6-drop and 1 7-drop. Not entirely sure, but there's a small dent in the 4-drops. Anyways, aside from that, there are a lot of 5-drops, but there's also a lot of 3, 2, and 1-drops. So it's actually not that bad. My build gets off running really early, in my opinion. Anyways, let's take a look at it. The cards that I don't run: 2 Terramorphic Expanses. No need to explain that, I think. Or I could. I think 2 is 2 extras would be too much. 2 is enough. That's enough because there are a lot of good cards that you could justify running instead of the 2 Terramorphic Expanses. But I think I had more success running a couple of them. Anyways, Essence Warden. I don't see the purpose of this card aside from the obvious, gaining 1 life. There's no synergies working with this. You only have 1 of them, so it's not all about like fortifying by gaining a ton of life. This is gonna gain you a little bit of life, and I think it's fairly unimpressive and unimportant because you'll probably, if this deck works smoothly, you're gonna win on in turn 4 in the earliest. Turn 5, turn 6, or turn 7 are very viable options for winning because it's just such a strong deck. So you don't need to gain life all that much. Ulvenwald Tracker is a card that I took out in the very end. Don't think it does as much for me as it does in the Pack Instinct deck. It's really good, and you have plenty of creatures to fight with your opponent's creatures. I might end up putting it back in, but at the end of the day, you're just going to swing in there with so much power and so much toughness that, or at least power, that you might be able to get through without even worrying about your opponent's creatures. And he's going to be so intimidated that he's going to be holding back. When you start needing this guy, this is the time when you start realizing that your build is not good enough, because you're supposed to be smacking your opponent and you're supposed to be intimidating him, even if he drops those removal cards on you, even if he's running Pack Instinct and so on. You should be getting in there very early and with very strong and big guys that are pumped to the moon with trample on them. So yeah, I don't think so, pal. This guy is only really good if you get to land drop 7, and that's why it's too situational. It's a hidden 7-drop for me. I don't really need it before I can cast it for 7. It's basically the text says that it gains a +1/+1 counter for every time you pump it, or every for every numerical score that you place instead of X. So that means that if you cast it for 3, it's going to be a 1/1, and so on, so forth. But if you hit 5 instead of X, that means it's going to cost 7. You double that amount, which means that it's going to be a 10/10. If instead of X you played for 6, it's going to be a 12/12. Instead of 7, or 7 instead of X, then it's going to be a 14/14, and so on. And that's really powerful. So it's a good, very, very good late game card that's going to be very intimidating. But I think, again, I want my deck to be a little faster, and I really don't need it I really don't need it early. I don't really need its removal ability all that much. So yeah, I think you could definitely build this deck towards towards being more of a long game deck, and then you might need then you might want to take advantage of its secondary ability, or I guess its primary ability. The first paragraph is not really an ability; it's just a condition, I guess. But yeah, you might want to take advantage of that and make it more controlly. But for me, no, I don't think so. We have the Gruul Guild Mage. I think you can run up to 3 of them. I run 2 of them because it's really, really good. It's one of the better Guild Mages in my opinion. Or maybe I don't know. It's I don't know if it's one of the better ones. It's a pretty good one. Just like the other guild mages, it's a 2/2 for 2. For 4, you can sack a land and deal 2 damage to target player. That might be very, very good end game. So this makes it a very good end game card, opposed to some of the other guild mages. And it's very good early game because you can make your side more impressive, even with just 2 creatures. A 2/1 and this guy during turn 2. And you can start swinging it for a little bit of damage. But once you hit turn 4 or land drop 4, you can start like putting a lot of pressure on your opponent's side, unless he has a huge creatures down himself, or unless, of course, he has some removal. So it's a great card that really does a lot for your early game. This guy, I'm running 1 of them. You have an option of running 2, the Tattermunge Witch. It's pretty good. I would say it's a 2 cost 2/1, and you can pump it with 1 red, 1 green. Each block creature gets +1/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. That's very situational, and that's why I run 1 of them. It might be really, really good. It might be a great way of both giving your opponent something to think about, but also giving your opponent quite a bit of a headache when you swing in with a lot of small creatures. If you play or if you construct your deck in that manner, and if he himself is playing Peacekeepers or something, then your side is going to be stronger. You're gonna potentially do more damage, trample, give a bit of damage, and then kill off his side. So that's it's a card that's good for that. But I think in other cases where your opponent just have a few singular strong creatures, you're not going to be needing it as much. It's not going to be buffing your non-block creatures, the ones that get in there. So it's just basically going to help you in situations where your creatures are getting blocked. But that's pretty good. Another thing that you'll see, which is a theme to my deck, I don't want too many abilities that steal up mana, because I want to be very, very strong, or I want my creatures to be a heavy influence on the board from early on. So I want to be able to have enough mana left to cast those combat tricks and to do a lot of damage. And this combat trick here is not that tricky, because it's revealed as soon as you have this creature down, but at the same time it gets a little bit expensive if you want to do a lot of damage, but it's still a good card. So I'm running 1 of them. I'm running 1 of these basically because I want an extra 3/3 for 3, and I have 2 Centaur Colossus. But it's basically just a cheap creature which has to attack every turn if able, and that's not going to be a huge problem. Of course, it's also situational, so there are going to be situations where this is going to be an annoyance to you because you can't hold it back if your opponent is just gonna have those big creatures that are going to destroy it, or have death touch creatures or whatever. But I think it's an early game sort of big guy, middle to big guy, which is gonna do some damage, which is gonna be fill, like just one of them is gonna give you an extra 3/3 for 3 in the deck, and that's why I'm running one of them. Here we go. Branching Bolt is another cool card. It's which is also very situational. A lot of times you're not going to be able to use both of its effects. It's a 3-cost instant which deals 3 points of damage to target creature with flying, and or 3 points of damage to target creature without flying. And you're able to, as the card says, use both abilities, so you can kill a flyer and a non-flying creature, or do damage to both. But a lot of the times you're not going to be able to use both of them. So most of the time it's just going to be an expensive lightning bolt. But there are going to be those times where it's going to do a lot of good for you. But yeah, definitely not all the time. I took out one. I kept in 2 because I need a little bit of removal in the deck, but not 3. I think that's too much for such a situational card, especially because you can't throw it at your opponent's face, and it's a little bit expensive. I mean, Lightning Bolt cannot target 2 creatures, but it can target your opponent's face if he has no creatures, or if his creatures are not a threat to you. So yeah, and it's only a 1 cost. Anyways, this guy is really, really cool, but I decided again it takes up too much mana for it to be a threat. But you can choose to run it. Feral Animist, 3 cost 2/1 for 3 mana. It basically doubles its power. So cast a buff spell on it, for example, Colossal Might. It becomes a 6/3. And you use its ability and it becomes a 12/3. That's pretty good. And I still haven't decided whether or not I'm going to run it or not. But I think for now I'm just deciding on not, because there are just too many other good cards that I prefer instead. Don't get me wrong, it's a great card, and I'm certainly not going to advise against running it. Sacred Wolf is decent because it's a hexproof guy. It can be invaluable in some situations against, for example, Obedient Dead, or against Crosswinds, or many other decks. But here's the thing about Sacred Wolf: it's a 3/1 in a deck that thrives on getting in there for a lot of damage. You can't use it in many other situations. It doesn't gain a lot from you buffing it with what's it called, the runes of the Deus, and so on. It's just vanilla in that sense. The only thing it has going for it is the hexproof, and it's not that fucking important in this deck. So I think Sacred Wolf is really, really good in other decks. In this deck, not so much. So I don't run any of them. Wild Size might, on the looks of it, seem like a good card because it draws you a card, but it's a +2/+2 buff and trample for 3, whereas Colossal Might is for 2 mana, 1 green, 1 red. It's a +4/+2 and trample. So yeah, I want something that's cheaper. I want something that I can cast early on. This one takes up too much mana. I have other buff spells. I have Berserk, and so on and so forth. I don't think it's that impressive, basically. Breath of Fury, I think I run one of them, to be honest. I don't want to run all 3, because I can definitely see if you run this way more creature heavy than I do, then you're going to want to swing in there and keep swinging in there until your opponent has no more creatures, and you just keep swinging in there, doing more and more damage. But I run fewer creatures. I run a select amount of really good creatures in my opinion, and a bunch of combat tricks. So I didn't get to during the a little bit more than 30 matches I spent unlocking these cards against the AI. I didn't get to use this card. I got to use this card a few times, but the only time that it actually that I actually was able to gain a little bit of use out of it was by using it on a card that I'll show you very, very soon, which removes enchantments or artifacts and gains or loses a -1/-1 counters and becomes bigger. So that was the only that's the only part where Breath of Fury really helped me out. If you don't know this card, it's also in the Act of War deck. It's a 4-cost aura. When enchanted creatures deal combat damage to a player, not just combat damage, but to a player, sacrifice it, the creature that is, and attach Breath of Fury to a creature you control. If you do, untap all creatures you control, and after this phase, there's an additional combat phase. This card works so much better in this deck than it does in Act of War. That's my opinion, at least. But for my builds, not so much. Chameleon Colossus, I'm not running it. It's a great card. It's a 4-cost 4/4 changeling, protection from black, and you can double its power and toughness. Again, it's the kind of thing like I might regret it, but so far I don't want to spend all my mana because I want to get in there so early. I don't want to spend all my mana buffing my singular creature. I want to be more tricky. I want to. I basically just want to have tricks, and I basically want to focus on a few creatures which are primarily dual-colored and primarily gain from Runes of the Deus and I forget what it's called, the leash that buffs red and black. Red and green. But yeah, it's a creature that I'm on the fence of because it is definitely a good creature. This guy just has to get the hell out. It's a 4-cost 3/2, and if you spend any red mana, it has haste. Impressive, huh? Not really. So it's basically a 3/2 with haste. But aside from that, it's a little expensive, don't you think? There's 4 of them. Not a single one, not a single fuck, and not a single one was run. Not a single fuck was given, not a single fuck was run. Here, Ulas the Hate Seed was so good on paper, but the way that I play this deck, with not too many creatures, and I run it very aggro, very, very early game, I want to take my opponent out. This guy just didn't have enough creatures, or I didn't have enough creatures on board to actually gain anything out of dropping it. Let's take a look at the paragraphs here. Ulas the Hate Seed, it's kind of like the other Hydra. Ulas the Hate Seed enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each other red creature you control, and a +1/+1 counter on it for each other green creature you control. Basically, some of the times, it's not going to be that huge. You can pay 1 colorless and remove a +1/+1 counter from Ulas the Hate Seed. Choose 1. It deals 1 damage to target creature, not player, as the other Hydra did. Or you can put a 1/1 green sapling creature token onto the battlefield. Nothing is really done with this ability. I mean, like, this is just so out of the blue in a sense. And I could see this card being somewhat useful if for example you run let's see, if you run a lot of smaller creatures and you run a few of the Tattermunge Witches, which boosts all blockers or all block creatures and so on and so forth. But aside from that, you don't have a lot of across the board buffers, so the sapling creatures are not going to be a huge deal. It seems more defensive than offensive to me, and yeah, I'm not a huge fan. I mean, there's going to be a lot of decks that you could run this in where it's going to be an amazing card, but in this deck, or at least in my build, it's not really doing a lot for me. So, sorry. And here's the guy that I talked about. The 4 cost 4/4 with a -1/-1 counter on it. You can remove that -1/-1 counter and destroy target artifact or enchantment, and it becomes a 4/4. So basically, it's a it's a what's it called? Stomp Howler, isn't it? What it's called, the Indrik, or to some extent, it's more like the Stomp Howler than it is the Acidic Slime. But it's a 3/3 until you destroy an artifact or an enchantment. I think I run one of them because it's just nice to have a little bit of artifact and enchantment removal, but it's not the best creature ever, so I don't want to run too many of them because it's not doing a lot for me. Yeah, a lot of the time it's gonna be removed before it does a lot of good on board. And since it's a 3/3 for 4, I think it's a little expensive if you only use it for combat. So yeah, there's that. Here's another a little bit expensive guy. It's a 4/4 for 5, and it has to attack each turn if able. Berserkers of the Blood Rich. I run none of them. I like to control when I'm attacking, at least for if I'm paying that much mana. Then there's the Silverback Ape, which is a 5/5 for 5. It's not that expensive, but it's very vanilla. It doesn't have any tricks. I think I would rather have creatures that does stuff for me. So no, thank you. Here's a really good card that I decided against running again because I want to. I think I have enough tricks and enough good creatures to finish off the combat very early on. I might end up putting it back in the deck if I find out that I play a lot of decks that put me in a stalemate where I have a lot of creatures but I can't get into the other side. He removes my Mage Slayer dagger or whatever it's called, and so on and so forth, because this is a nice way of just taking all your creatures and turning them into instant damage to your opponent's face. Here's another guy that does some of the same. Skargan Skybreaker, just like the Skargan Firebird. It's a little expensive and a little too small. It's a 7 cost, 3/3 with Bloodthirst 3. So if you swing in there, do some damage, then you get a 6/6 instead of a 3/3. Then for 1 you can sacrifice it and deal damage equal to its power to target creature or player. It's good. I mean, or the secondary ability is good. The first, I think, is nutty. I would rather have it not have Bloodthirst and just be 6/6 to begin with. But yeah, what can you do? It's too situational for me, and there are much better cards in the deck. So let's take a look at the cards that I'm actually running. Terramorphic Expanse, yeah, we know that. Here are some of the most beastiest fucking cards that you'll ever see. Berserk, I remember that from back when I used to play Paper Magic. There were hymns sung about it. There were tales spun in commemoration of this card, and suddenly it was re-released, I think, in the 5th edition or something. I can't remember. But then we all got to play with this card, but because suddenly it wasn't too overpowered. But it's basically a pretty insane card. It's really, I think it used to be restricted. I don't know what it is now, but before you could only play one of them when you were actually allowed to play it. You can only cast this instant for 1, by the way, before the combat damage step, which means that you can't kill off your opponent's creatures by casting it on your opponent's creatures before or after combat, basically. I think that's why. I think that's why it has the stipulation, because it's supposed to dissuade you from or it's supposed to dissuade you from casting it on your opponent's creatures a little bit, because it's so powerful. First of all, your target creature gains trample and it gets +X+0 until end of turn. X is equal to the creature's power, so you effectively double that creature's power, the power that it has at the very moment that you cast this spell. and at the beginning of the next end step you destroy that creature. So it runs amok, it just goes berserk, and then it dies of exhaustion if it doesn't die in combat. And you get to run 2 of them, which is completely nuts. So a simple 4/4 will become a 8/4, and if you cast a second one, it'll become a 16/4. That's pretty insane. If you got a Rancor on it, it's just a totally different story. It's just gonna be a humongous guy. Anyways, by the way, I run 2 that is both Rancors, because in this deck it is absolutely nuts. It's nuts in most decks, but it's absolutely insane in this deck. It'll make this guy a huge threat very, very early on. Tattermunge Maniac is a 1-drop. You have to attack each turn, but it's a 2/1, so that's pretty nuts. Very, very cool card in my opinion. It's a nice little board presence from early on. It's something that your opponent is going to throw his creatures in front of very early just to get rid of, because 2 points of damage every turn from the from second turn and onwards is not fun. And I run both of them, by the way. Colossal Might, one of the best buff cards in the game. It's a 2 cost, 1 red, 1 green. It buffs your creature +4/+2 and gives it trample. Absolutely insane. It has a nice little flavor text. Never corner a barbarian. You become the path of least resistance. Insanity, uttered by Sarkhanval. I run all 4 because I want a lot of them each match. It's just such a huge difference maker, and in conjunction with the Berserk, for example, just see, like I have a Tattermunge Maniac. It's turn 3. I have 2 forests and a mountain. Cast a Colossal Might, it becomes a 6/2. Cast a Berserk, it becomes a 12. It becomes a 6/3, and cast a Berserk, and it becomes a 12/3. Absolutely insane on turn 3. Then you have the Fling, which is also pretty insane. One of the nastiest looking graphics here. It's a 2-cost instant, and you sacrifice a creature and deal an equal amount of damage to target creature or player as the power of that creature. So that's one of the themes of this deck. Not as much as in my build as it could be. As I showed you, I have taken a few cards out that does some of the same, but definitely have a lot of doing indirect or direct damage rather than combat damage, and this is one of the options. So you swing in there with your huge guy, you have enough mana, you cast Fling, and your opponent, who thought that he blocked correctly and would be able to survive another turn, was dead wrong, literally. Gruul Guildmage, already talked about him, run 2 of them. Tattermunge Witch, run 1 of them, already talked about it. Already talked about Bloodrock Cyclops, run 1 of them. Already talked about Branching Bolt, run 2 of them just to have some removal. Centaur Courser, I run 2 of them because there's 2 available and it's cheap. 3/3 for 3 is fairly cheap in my opinion. Fires of Yavimaya, I run both of them. Well, why would you run both of them? Because it only gives your creatures haste. Well, it does that, plus you're able to sacrifice it and buff one of your creatures. So that's extra board presence, and it's extra damage to swing in there, especially because you have cumulative damage in a sense with the Berserks and so on. So a little bit goes a long way in this deck when it comes to power and damage. Here's another way of taking advantage of Fires of Yavimaya and other buff spells. Mage Slayer, that's what it's called. 3-cost artifact, dual colored by the way, and when equipped creature attacks, it deals damage equal to its power to defending player. So that's when you attack. You declare attackers, and that creature is going to swing in directly at your opponent's face, and then you attack. So I remember Wingspan TT called it a double strike if your opponent doesn't have any if he doesn't have any blockers for you. Yeah, but if he does have blockers, it's just direct damage at your opponent's face. It makes it a viable option, just throwing your creatures into the certain death at some point, because it's gonna do damage, and your opponent can't do anything about it unless he can take this artifact away from you. Boar Tusk Leash is a great leash, for the simple fact, not because it has great abilities. It's just like the other leashes in the sense that it has it buffs red creatures and green creatures respectively by +1/+1, and dual colored creatures of both colors +2/+2. It's a great leash because it makes such a huge difference in this deck. Because again, with the cumulative damage, again with being able to get in there early with creatures that are fairly big that you buff, and then you throw a Berserk on them, and then you just do like a hell of a lot of damage in a few turns and kill your opponent's turn 5 or 6 or something like that. It's fairly cheap. It's a 4-cost 3/4 with great abilities, and then it has Trample on its own. Not a great, I would say, primary ability. I would call it tertiary, because the secondary and tertiary ability are actually its primary abilities, just like with the other leashes. But Trample is not that impressive when it comes to this guy. But I guess it's just, yeah, this guy just needs Trample because it's the red-green guy. It's not Gruul because it's from either Shadowmoor or Eventide, but still, yeah, you know. Breath of Fury, already talked about it, running one of them, because it might be helpful, it might not. And here it is, Rumbling Slum. 4-cost, 5/5, very, very cheap. And then it has an ability that might work against you, but might work against your opponent as well. Probably work against both of you in some sense, but it also might help you out a little bit at the same time. At the beginning of your upkeep, Rumbling Slum deals 1 damage to each player. Not a huge deal, but it works well with the flavor text and with the whole lore about it, in a sense. But yeah, to get a sense of what the Gruul guild is about, you just need to take a peek at this text. The Orjov contract the Isid, the Orjov being like the bankers and the financial guys and ghosts and religious people and extortioners and then whatever. Contract the Isid, who are the crazy maniacal experimenters and mages and so on, to animate slum districts and banish them to the wastes, or to the wastes, sorry. That's pretty interesting. The Orjov wants to improve, quote unquote, on the city and banish the slums, and they contract the Isid to animate these slums and force them out into the wilds. The Gruul adopt them and send them back to the city for vengeance. There we go. That's all you need to know. Well, not exactly, but that goes a long way. Very, very cool text. Here's another very, very cheap guy that does a lot for you, against certain decks at least, is Spellbreaker Behemoth, 4-cost, 5/5. It can't be countered. That's a shame, blue guys. It cannot be countered. It's a shame Simic. It's a shame of Crosswinds. It's a shame Dream Puppets, and so on and so forth. Mindstorms, for that matter. Creature spells you control with power 5 or greater can't be countered. That's a neat ability as well. It's going to be very, very cool late game. But I don't run it as much for its secondary ability. I run it more for the fact that it's cheap and it's a big guy of dual-colored proportions, so to speak. Because, again, the dual-colored thing works well with the leash. It also works well with another card that we'll get to very soon. Wickerbur Elder already talked about it, run 1. Here's a guy a card that we know from Trinity of Elements from Magic 2012. The Blitzhelion, which is a 5-cost 7/7 with trample and haste. Pretty insane, very cheap, but you don't get it more than one turn. But that one turn might be enough, especially in conjunction with the leash, which in case that it becomes a 9/9. At the beginning of the end step, Blitzhelion's owner shuffles it into his or her library. So you don't lose it, it's not destroyed, but you have to draw it again and cast it again. But it's going to be a difference maker. It's going to be 7 points of damage that your opponent might not see coming. So I run both of them. Here's an amazing card as well. A 5 cost 6/6. So fucking cheap. It has no drawbacks as far as I can see. Very cool card. Just like the other Spirit Avatar cards. Just like Godhead of Ore and Demigod of Revenge and what have you. There's a few others. There's actually quite a few. One of them being Overbeing of Myth. Very, very good. Very mana efficient and cheap. It's a 6/6 with trample, and whenever it deals 6 or more damage to an opponent, destroy target land that player controls. What else is there to say? That's just destruction and maniacal damage doing. Like that's such a great card. Here's another reason why you want to run a lot of dual-colored creatures. Runes of the Deus, 5 cost, a little bit expensive for an aura, but take a look at this. Just like the leashes, it boosts your creature with +1/+1 if it's red, and +1/+1 if it's green. That is for those that are hard of hearing and a little bit slow. If your creature is dual colored, red and green, it's gonna get +2/+2. But that's not all, folks. Here's what you get if you buy this thing early, or actually just if you cast this spell. It's gonna get double strike, and it's gonna get trample. Imagine that. Even if you cast it on the Tattermunge Maniac, which is a 2/1 swing in every turn, it's gonna be a 4/3 with double strike and trample. That's just insane. But try to cast it on this guy. It's gonna be an 8/8 trample double strike. Whenever it deals 6 or more damage to an opponent, destroy target land that player controls. Wow, just so much goodness. Here's another guy which I was on a fence about for about 2 minutes until I started thinking a little bit about it. The Sheevan Worm is a 5 cost 7/7. You have to, with trample, and you have to bounce a creature back to your hand, or else you have to bounce this guy back if you have no other creature. So you need a guy which you don't have to sacrifice, but you have to bounce it back to your hand. So that's actually not that expensive. So if you have, for example, the Gruul Guild Mage, which is a 2 cost, and you've gotten a little bit of use out of it, and then you hit land drop 5, you switch it out for a Sheevan Worm, you're still able to cast the Gruul Guild Mage next turn. But then you get basically a 7/7 trample guy in exchange. That is hugely insane for 5 mana. Like, I mean, sure, you have to bounce a guy, but this means that you could drop it early. Pretty insane. And I run both of them. Here's another guy that's pretty cool. I haven't gotten to use it a little bit, and when I got it down, it made such a big difference. It's a really, really cool guy. 5 cost 4/4. Pretty standard, but it has trample. A little bit better, actually a lot better. But this ability is awesome because it also affects it itself. Whenever a creature you control with trample attacks, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So that means it's a 4/4 blocker, a 6/6 attacker, and every other creature that you swing in with, even if you don't attack with this guy, is going to get +2/+2 when it attacks, as long as it has trample. Awesome. This card I originally thought that I wasn't gonna use, but as soon as I got to play it a few times, I just knew that I had to play it or bring it along for the ride. It's just such a great card. It's a 6 cost sorcery, and basically bounces a card a card from your graveyard to your hand. Not even just a creature, any kind of card. And if you return a non-land card to your hand this way, Vengeful Rebirth deals damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to target creature or player. That is an endgame card, turn 6. If your opponent is playing Obedient Dead, you got in there for a lot of damage, but your opponent just wiped your board several times, just killed off your creatures, and he thinks, now I start getting in there, or now I start building with my Avatar of Woe and my Massacre Worm and my Rune Scarred Demon and so on. It's your turn. You cast Vengeful Rebirth. You take one of your big guys and you do a lot of damage directly to his face. You can only do this once. There's no other cards that will set cards from your graveyard back to your hand in this deck, but you have to exile it. But that's not very significant in this deck one way or the other. But this is a very cool card, and the fact that you get your creature back to your hand is pretty awesome. The last card that I run is Borborygmus. I've talked about it before, but I'll talk a little bit more extensively about it now. Borborygmus, the Gruul guild leader at that point in time, back I think it was during Dissension, which was part of the original Ravnica block. 7 cost 6/7 with trample is pretty good to begin with. It's not too expensive. It's fairly decently costed in that sense, but its ability is really cool. Whenever Borborygmus deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, no matter if they're attacking or not. Just buff your side. Just make your side more impressive. So there's not going to be a lot of times where you swing in with this guy and you're not dealing damage to your opponent because it has trample and it's a big guy. So that's going to be hugely significant early on. So that's the most expensive card that I run. But basically this is my build. Yeah, I look forward to getting some matches in there. I look forward to hearing you guys' opinions about this deck and especially about my build of it. I'm on the fence of it. I've called it a Timmy deck at several times, and a Timmy deck, for those of you who don't know, is basically a deck with huge creatures, which is all about just swinging in there with huge creatures. It doesn't have that many combinations, doesn't have that many control effects and so on. I think, as far as I know, a Timmy deck is pretty much the opposite of a Johnny deck, which is more along the lines of combinations and control and so on. Anyways, yeah, I am on the fence about whether I like it or not, because I love winning early game, and I love having these huge creatures which does a lot of damage, but I think I'm going to hate playing against it. I'm probably gonna get really, really frustrated once I'm done testing it and once I have to start playing against it. But that being said, it's impressive in many ways. I love its combat tricks. I love the fact that it's very efficient, and I love the way that you're able to build it. I hope that I get to play a lot of players who don't build it the same way as me, because I think my build is very strong. But I might be wrong, who knows. Anyways, thanks for watching on Multeyemeteor. This was Magic 2013 and the Berserker Rage deck of the Gruul Guild from Ravnica. So hope I see you in another video, and later!